46 videos in my watch later list totaling 22 plus hours of consumption time. 56 podcasts in my listen later list totaling 62 plus hours of consumption time. 25 articles in my listen later list, because I speechify those things, totaling another 6 plus hours of consumption time. That is almost 100 plus hours of consumption time in my inboxes. And then there is TV, social media, and that I have no idea what the consumption time would be. There is an abundance of information out there in all forms of medium, but not all information is necessary. This video continues my series around note-taking and how to avoid, maintain, and actually increase the consumption of information. I will be covering how I manage levels of consumption, speed of consumption, quality of consumption, and then how I take notes from the consumption. So, levels of consumption. When we consume, it can be active or passive. Active consumption means consuming with an intention, usually a learning intention. This is consumption when you might be taking notes on it, or you might be saving it to take notes on it later on. And then passive consumption, meaning consuming for entertainment, normally for the purpose of rest, recovery, or relaxation. This can also be when you just want to appreciate the work and art of the creator. Consuming information with a learning intention requires concentration, so eliminating distractions is kind of an obvious one, but removing fluffy sources and using a variety of trustworthy sources instead can actually be a way of reducing consumption. So consuming from people or places that use diverse sources themselves, using references with synthesis and critique to create the informed opinions that they are sharing. Just doing this alone and being honest with yourself can actually reduce quite a lot of consumption, because formulated opinions are much more useful than wild statements. Then forgetting irrelevant information, getting rid of the fluff, knowing what not to capture is another step in reducing consumption. Things you already know well, things irrelevant to the goals you have, and things that go against your purpose of taking notes. Some things I explored in the last video: regurgitation of information, taking notes for understanding, fear of forgetting information, and action-focused notes. In addition to that, knowing what to capture also helps managing consumption. Capturing action-focused notes, so things we remember we need to do, things we might want to do in the future, and things we should do in the future. Then we want highlightable points, such as key points, new ideas, powerful insights, contradicting comments, unique topics, inspiring thoughts, useful terms, easily lost references, or work done by the author/creator. If you're consuming for entertainment, it should be for a justifiable reason. Rest. You've done X amount of work and you need a physical or mental break before going again or doing something that needs a bit of a mental shift. Recovery. The accumulated work you have done needs some help in coming back to baseline. Active recovery like ice baths, foam rolling, massage, saunas, yoga, nature immersion, meditation, and gaming all fall in this category, but it is for the purpose of avoiding burnout. Relaxation could be a reward for something as an external motivator, or an important time to build or maintain relationships with family and friends, certainly something that shouldn't be missed out or forgotten about. And consuming just for the appreciation of the originality and artistry of the work they have done, maybe a great article, great video, or great movie. But with consuming for entertainment, it can be easy to give a justification when you start. What about 5 minutes in? 10 minutes in? 30 minutes in? Is the justification you made still valid? Considering those questions, is it a fluffy source? Is it full of fluffy information? Is this still justifiable? Can still result in a backlog, that watch later list, movie list, read later list, etc. At this point, I ask myself one question: why do I care I have a backlog? Fear of being outdated, fear of missing an insight, fear of judgment, fear of not knowing, fear of looking silly, fear of so many different things. And they were built from expectations I put to myself. Knowing all the new stuff, being able to talk about everything that was going on, being able to answer all the possible questions people may ask. These expectations leading to goals that I just couldn't maintain in the long term anyway. So I decided I would accept the backlog, but just monitor what I put in it. So I have reduced my levels of consuming unnecessary information, and I challenge consuming for entertainment so I don't do it for too long, and I maintain this by looking at speed and quality of consumption. All forms of medium can be sped up using more mental bandwidth at higher speeds. If you're watching this at times 2 speed, you will know what I'm talking about, as you will still be able to hear all of the words I'm saying, but your ability to do other tasks, like type the highlight or points out and take a second to think about what I've said, will be much more challenging, and even more so I have sped this section up in the edit to make it times 4. For active consumption, speeding things up is actually useful for getting through all the fluff, because some articles, videos and podcasts have fluff that I don't really need. However, if it doesn't have a lot of fluff and there are lots of highlightable points, a bit like my recent recap video, then having a slower consumption speed is actually more appropriate. On the other hand, when consuming for entertainment, I actually want the opposite. I want to slow down. I don't mind there being fluff. The purpose of consuming for entertainment is rest, recovery, relaxation. So let your body and mind rest. What this means is the backlog of active consumption is worked through quicker, which for me is useful as that is where most of my consumption is, and the backlog for entertainment is slower, but is often more thought out. Which brings me to quality of consumption. Now, I have already mentioned trustworthy sources, but good quality content does play a role. Irrespective of the medium, good storytelling, so easy to follow if it is active consumption, exciting to follow if it is for passive consumption, use of plain language, so getting rid of the fluff, getting to the point, avoiding jargon, using supporting visuals or graphics, or using shorter sentences. And clarity in communication, so audio having uninterrupted and clear sound, video having clear audio but not off-putting visuals or gestures, and written using plain language, so minimal jargon, lingo, etc., and pleasing aesthetics or formatting, and none of these things should be an issue with the sources, and if they are, I either remove them or replace them. Now I have reduced my consumption and have some guidelines about maintaining consumption, I then actually look to increase consumption just a little bit. To help contextualize this, I will jump a few steps forwards in the whole process and say sharing and expressing our knowledge is much more easier to do when starting from abundance. And having abundance does come from consumption. After going through processing and working with those notes, which I will be going through in future videos. But to work from abundance, I need to have abundance in a note format, which is where a capture note comes in. This is a note taken during or soon after consuming something, often from active consumption, but could be from some passive consumption. And it includes any points you thought worth taking, but not all points in a capture note will be highlightable or actionable points. They're just points that you wanted to get down at the time. Now, the capture tool of choice will be dependent on the medium and place you're consuming the content. If I find something on social media, when browsing YouTube, or when reading something that is interesting, I don't do much thought then and there. I clip it and add it to the active backlog. So thinking back to active and passive consumption, when I'm actively consuming, I'm looking through that backlog of trustworthy sources to consume information. But if I'm consuming for passive consumption, I may be clipping things to my active backlog, but that's it. I don't go and explore them because passive consumption is what I'm doing right now. So I want to rest, I want to recover, but I'll clip it for later on. In order to keep me going when I am in an active consumption stage, I want the capture note process to be quite speedy. A digital capture tool gives me features that help me speed this process up and help me later on in the notes journey that an analog tool just doesn't give me. Moving things around, changing things as I go, and using templates are the main things that speed me up. Using a handwriting tool like an iPad won't actually help me. Yes, I have tried, because I'm up and down the page, tab things all over, but my preference is keyboard over pen. Like I mentioned in the last video, as long as the note is comprehensible now and in the future, findable, and captures everything that you need to, the rest is just personal preference. What I will say is speed writing, touch typing is useful, abbreviations and shorthand can be useful, and on computers you could use something like TextExpander to help you out. I know I am much faster typing words than writing words if I want to be able to understand what I've written later on. Something else I use is pre-planning, so I know what all of my notes will look like. I have picked points from the various note-taking methods and have a setup that is consistent. What all this means is during active consumption, when I have made a capture note, I then have all the highlightable points right in front of me, which I then use in the processing of my notes, but to add more content that links with that capture note. So I add things to my active backlog that are linked specifically to the highlightable points in the capture note I've made, so when I do process and work on those notes and start sharing what I know in conversations, they are formulated opinions rather than just one highlighted point. If you want to hear how I process my notes, that will be the next video in this series. But until then, get off YouTube and do something productive with your time instead.